Hello friends, we are back with more charity gift content, but this time we'll be shifting away the focus away from my noise biotech decks onto actual good players. Today we'll be watching a match at the top tables, where we watch Alex White, who is a two-time top 8 finisher at Worlds, playing Mtiwekundu against Dan, who is running Gabriel Santiago. He's a returning champion of Charity Gift. As you'll soon see from his playmat, he has won this tournament before, one of its past incarnations. So this should be a very nice match to watch. Now, some of you might be thinking, hey, Charity Gift meta was the old meta before System Core, before the new Most Wanted list. What's the point of watching an outdated video? Well, these archetypes are not dead, right? Even though System Core has massively shaked up the game, a lot of these existing archetypes are still competitively viable today. So if you're looking to join in top level play, this is still a good game to watch for Netrunner fundamentals and learning about these archetypes and what they can and cannot do. Sure, there'll be some deck differences. I think at least the MT deck is definitely not legal in its current state, but with some card changes, it can definitely be made to be workable. So just keep in mind, this is not so much about talking about deck construction. This is going to be more about looking at high-level play and how these top-tier players go about their gameplay. So, without further ado, let's jump into the recording. Okay, I know a lot of you are not a big fan of my makeshift camera. It's very unstable and it doesn't lead to it doesn't make for good viewing pleasure. But this recording should be a lot better because there was no one using the table on which I mounted my camera, so the stability should be fine. It's just that you are not getting, I changed the dimensions of the video to be square, so there's a lot of black padding on the sides. Do forgive me for that. So, once again, to remind everyone, on the left is Alex playing MT, on the right is Dan playing Gabriel Santiago. Turn 1 is a very vanilla opening from Alex. Install ice on HQ, take 2 credits, pass the turn. This is a very important opening against Gabe to put ice on HQ. Because Gabe gets so much mileage out of HQ runs. You don't want Gabriel Santiago to play Employee Strike followed by a diversion of funds. That loses you a lot of tempo and it gains Gabe a lot of money. So ice on HQ was a very good choice. There was no need for Alex to put ice on R&D or archives here because he can rely on his MT ability to keep the runner from being too aggressive early on. The fact that Alex hasn't created a remote, usually you would want to put some ice on the remote and jam a Rashida or something through, means that he is gearing up for an IPO next turn. This is very obvious because instead of drawing cards or installing more cards, he's taking 2 credits. So you can definitely infer that he wants to get an IPO up. If you're playing a very aggressive runner, you can definitely consider running centrals because it's very unlikely that Alex will choose to rest ice, given that he wants to play the IPO next turn. However, you must keep in mind that giving Alex the opportunity to use MT to install ice for free in terms of clicks is not a good thing either. He can choose to install with MT and not rest the ice. So allowing him to build his board for free is not something you want to do as the runner. Okay, so let's start playing off. Yeah, I'm just gonna speed through the video and let's see. Click 1, then draws. Yep. And then he's gonna play a bunch of cards here. He's gonna play Sure Gamble, Dean Lister, then play crowdfunding as well. So pretty okay turn for Dan. He's not willing to play too aggressively here. On 7 credits, there's really not a lot that MT can threaten, but I think a Cortex Lock is something very undesirable given that he wanted to play all 3 cards from his hand. So Cortex Lock will flatline him if he plays too aggressively. Right, now Alex makes the play of credit, ice, R&D, IPO. So yep, the IPO was very expected there. Now over to Dan's turn. He basically draws 3 times and plays a second crowdfunding. And if your eyes were quick enough, you would actually catch a glimpse of Apocalypse in Dan's hand. So he's actually playing Apocalypse Gabe, which is really interesting. Alex's third turn is install 2 cards, one ice and one ice on the remote and 1 remote card, followed by rather I should say, first click draw, and then 2 cards in the remote. Alright, so that's almost certainly a Rashida. And then it's going to make use of that knowledge to play falsified credentials, click 1 on the Rashida, naming asset obviously. Well, joke's on him, it's a Marcus Betty. So he doesn't get the money from that, and Alex, being the good player he is, will preemptively res the Betty, so that Dan cannot play a second falsified credentials here to gain money. On Alex's side, he should be informed of the main breaker of this Gabriel Santiago deck. Now that he's seen Dean Lister and now the exposed and falsified credentials, he's got to figure that this deck is very much all in on Omakua as their main breaker. Right, so that is something to be expected, and you can probably guess that at this point Dan has not drawn a turtle or a special order to find the turtle. That's a card you want to get online as soon as possible if it's your main breaker. Right? So, yeah, so then just drawing for his turtle, can't really find it. Last click, take a credit. Not a very good start for Dan. The crowdfundings are paying off, but he's not getting the pressure he needs with his breakers. Over to Alex. Right, so he has established a good amount of money, so he can make a very strong play of install double advance in the remote. Protected by his ID ability and an ice on the remote, it's very difficult for most runners to challenge this. Most of the time they'll need to deal with at least 1, if not 2 gear checks on the remote. They'll also have to deal with the possibility of the remote card being an NGO front, which allows the corp to res some really nasty high strength, high impact face check ice. Right, DNA trackers, Shiashis, all that sort of thing are things that you have to really worry about. Shiashi on the remote will be particularly big of a problem because a Marcus Betty on the 2 net damage subroutine can easily flatline a runner who's unprepared. So let's see what response Dan has for this. This is only turn 4, but he's already forced to do something important, to actually contest things on the runner, on the corp side. So after thinking for a bit, he's going to click 1 special order for his turtle, click 2 install the turtle. He has a good amount of money because of the 2 crowdfundings and the sure gamble early on. So despite not having triggered his ID ability once this game, he's still able to afford running here. You'll notice that actually running here is pretty safe for Dan because of Dean Lister. The ability to pump Omakua's strength means that Dan is able to, run without worrying too much about face checks. So on click 3, he's going to run, and not just a normal run, he's going to Dirty Laundry so that he can keep his money level high. Dirty Laundry Archives, and Alex doesn't use Mti's ability to install an ice on Archives. You would almost always do this. You would almost always commit an ice on Archives as Alex here, if your remote asset is an NGO. Right? Because if it's an NGO front, you have a lot of money, so you can afford to just drop a piece of ice there for value and not have to worry about being unable to res any of your other ice on your other servers. The fact that Alex did not commit an ice on Archives means that he really wants to protect this remote server in case Dan decides to run their last click, because he certainly could. Omakua and Dean Lister as a combination allows him to get through the remote. So Alex choosing to save his MT trigger for the final click, where Dan takes quite a bit of time to think because he has 1 click left. Running last click can be very dangerous, but after seeing Alex's reaction towards the Dirty Laundry, Alex did not contest it, so he has to figure that the remote has something really important. Because most of the time, as Alex here, the other reason why you want to commit an ice on Archives is you want to force the Dean Lister out, right? If you're able to force the Dean Lister from Dan's side, it'll make it very difficult to contest any of the other servers without the safety net of Dean Lister. So Dan, knowing this, knows that there's probably something very high value in the remote, and so, as you soon see, he decides to challenge the remote last click. A very risky but calculated move. Alex is forced to res the border control here and play the Batty side game for the end of run. They both bid 1 credit, so Alex is forced to trash the border control here. This is really a feels bad trash. You never want to sacrifice a border control on a 2 credit tag server, but he needs to, because as you soon see, this is actually the same Mark 2. So trashing the border control was correct, even though it was suboptimal. One important thing to note here is that Alex did not trigger Mti's ability at all. So this probably indicates that Alex doesn't really have any ice in hand, right? Otherwise, he would have put some piece of ice on the remote as well. So that is actually an important observation there. And yeah, you can just see the power of border control in Netrunner. The ability to, punish last click runs like this by trashing the border control works out very well. Trading an end the run for an end the run on your agenda. So this was a good move for Alex. Scoring an Nisei is always nice, but at what cost? By raising the border control and advancing the Nisei, he puts himself below 8 credits, so he cannot threaten DNA Tracker or Nancy here. This is actually a big deal. Dan will be able to abuse this by playing diversion of funds into HQ. Normally this would be a bad move if Alex is on exactly 8 credits, because if he reses a DNA Tracker or a Nancy on HQ, he goes down to 0 credits. Diversion does absolutely nothing. He just wasted his important run event and 2 clicks since it's a double. But being on the magical 7 credits, there's not much that Alex can do to duck the diversion of funds. So ducking is a term that we used to use fairly often when account siphon was in the card pool. The meaning of ducking, the corp ducking an account siphon, or in this case ducking a diversion of funds, is to spend as many of your credits as possible so that diversion of funds is able to divert as few funds as possible. The more credits Alex can spend during this run, the less money that Dan will gain from the diversion of funds, because if the corp has 0 credits in their credit pool, the runner gains 0 from diversion of funds. So this is Alex's objective here. He wants to lose as much money as possible. He reses an Enigma here. This cannot be broken with Armor Core by itself, as it is only on 1 strength. Dan is forced to pump it here with Dean Lister, or have the Enigma end the run, which is pretty bad. So he pumps it, and he's about to siphon, but the Alex is able to use his ID ability to install another piece of ice inside, and then res it to duck the diversion of funds. So normally the diversion of funds would have netted Dan 4 credits there, but because Alex was able to offshore 2 of his credits onto the Thimble Rig, Dan is gaining less mileage out of the diversion of funds. So a good play by Alex here to use Mti's ability to soften the blow on diversion of funds. Alternatively, Alex could have used it in the same counter as well. I agree that this is not a place you want to expend it. There are far better uses for expanding the Nisei counter than a diversion of funds on HQ. Right, so fun diversion happens. Dan chooses to suck away Alex's 2 credits. So this is quite important. This puts Alex at 0 credits, which means that Dan can run freely on R&D. Alex not being able to rest the R&D ice. So Dan is going to run R&D 2 times. Right, clicks 1 and 2 diversion. Click 3, click 4, run R&D twice. Even though he sees the same card, he's getting total counters, so that's good. The bigger thing, however, is because he made 3 runs, diversion into 2 R&D runs, he gets both his crowdfundings back. So for that big turn where he ran so many times, Dan was able to gain 2 Armor Core counters, make Alex completely broke, and then gain 6 drip credits and 2 drip cards over the course of the next 3 turns. This is a huge swing in Dan's favor. And yeah, this this is the power of a run-based deck. If you are able to keep the corp poor, which Dan was able to in this case, you are then able to abuse the centrals that are not very well guarded. The corp cannot afford to rest ice, so you get lots of crowdfundings back as a result, and you are in a very healthy spot. Whereas the corp is basically forced to click for 3 credits this turn, as you see Alex do right there. So yeah, I mean, it was looking good for the corp. They scored an Nisei and all, but suddenly, wins, the prevailing wins have changed, and now Dan is in the driver's seat. At 3 credits, Alex really cannot threaten anything here, so it's really safe to continue running rampant on Alex's servers here. At least for single access, you would definitely want to do that. Let's see how Dan abuses this turn to steal some agendas. On his first click, he plays Employee Strike. This denies Alex the ability to recover by gaining clicks by using his ID ability. His second click is to run R&D here. Alright, he reses the Himitsu Bako, which is pretty irrelevant for Armor Core purposes, just 1 credit to break, sees a card, gets a total counter, and then he draws before running HQ here. Run HQ last click because he doesn't want to break the first subroutine on Enigma, so very, efficient and optimal play by Dan here, choosing to run HQ only on the last click, This means that firstly, he pays 1 credit less to the Enigma. Secondly, he's able to trigger his Gabriel Santiago ID this turn, meaning he gains the 2 credits from running the ID. And thirdly, he gets a single access, which happens to be an agenda that he can steal. So he drops 4 cards, and for the first time, Alex actually sees the Apocalypse in the bin. So he needs to play around that card for the remainder of the game. Alex takes 3 credits here. So yeah, I mean, Alex is a very big fan of the basic action card. We know that he knows that the basic action card is one of the most powerful cards in the game. Unfortunately, it's not as powerful as crowdfunding, so yeah, he's just really not getting as much out of his clicks as Dan is. You know, Dan having stolen an agenda, gotten a bunch of armor core counters, is looking pretty good. He's gonna run HQ, last click again, see an Anansi, after drawing 3 times to recover from the Obo Carter. Now back to Alex's turn. What he did here was to take a credit, hedge fund, and play scarcity. This puts him on 8 credits, but this also erases the employee strike, allowing him to get back in the game with empty triggers. So this was a very good play by Alex. I mean, not much else to say. Removing strike is very essential, and makes it such that Dan cannot run as often now. He has to worry about some DNA tracker, right? His armor core is only on 5 counters, so important to note there. Right, so now it's time for Dan's turn to think. There are a lot of lines of play he can make here. He can play passively, he can start setting up his board. He has an Apocalypse in hand, so he's looking to see if he can get that underway. So he's going to click 1, run HQ. Now this is a very telltale sign. We've been mentioning earlier that it is good for efficiency reasons and for optimality reasons to run HQ last click, because then you don't have to pay the 1 credit to the Enigma first set routine. The fact that Dan is running HQ first click here is a very telltale sign that something bad is going to happen in the last 3 clicks, that being the Apocalypse. So Alex not going to trigger MT here, going to access a card, an unseen, right? He gets the all-important 6 armor core counter. This is very important because now he doesn't have to worry about DNA tracker or gatekeeper. Click 2 is run R&D. He's going to run R&D, break the barcode, MT triggers, and installs the Anansi, which can be broken for 3 credits, and Nisei is stolen off the top of R&D. Click 3 is run archives. Yeah. Apocalypse. So, this is huge. This is a big problem for Alex. He just lost his entire board. Something went wrong there. So, what was Alex's misplay here? Firstly, he could have used the Nisei token, but I think it is rather unnecessary. I kind of agree with conserving the Nisei token. I think the biggest mistake Alex made by far here was to actually install and rest the Anansi on R&D. The way to recover from an Apocalypse, if you're expecting it obviously, is to hold lots of ice in your hand, and as MT, you're in a doubly good position to abuse this. Without employee strike on the board, you know, the runner really cannot run safely, because now their turtle is face down, their armor core, they don't have any breakers. So had Alex kept the Anansi, he would be on 8 credits because he spent 8 credits resing the Anansi. He would be able to threaten a lot of different kinds of ice, DNA trackers, Cortex locks, and of course the Anansi. But now that the Anansi is gone in the bin and he's down to 0 credits, Alex is basically board wiped and completely reset. He's forced to take 3 credits and he cannot threaten anything. So yeah, given that he knew that Apocalypse was in the bin, he saw it net damaged off Obo Carter. Installing the Anansi off the MT trigger last turn was a huge mistake. One other final point, Dan is not completely out of this either. You'll notice that he actually made 3 successful runs last turn. He ran HQ, he ran R&D, he ran Archives, he Apocalypsed. That means he actually could have gotten all his crowdfundings back from the bin. That would be amazing drip to recover, right? Lots of money, lots of passive card draw, and it just synergizes so well, crowdfunding with Apocalypse, because the Apocalypse condition is the exact same condition as, well, not exact, but it also fulfills the crowdfunding condition as well. And the best part is, because of the timing trigger, crowdfunding is installed after the Apocalypse. It is installed on your turn end. So yeah, you won't have the situation where crowdfunding comes back and then gets immediately flipped face down. That doesn't happen. So Apocalypse is amazing synergy with crowdfunding. Unfortunately, Dan did not remember his crowdfunding trigger. He missed out on quite a few credits here. But no matter, he's still going to run a bunch because Alex is poor, so he's going to check HQ, he's going to check R&D, trashing a Rashida, he's going to check R&D again, nothing happens, and then installs an Earthrise here. You'll notice once again, he ran 3 times this turn, HQ, R&D twice, trashing a Rashida in the bin, but did not recover his crowdfundings. Again, you know, this was the last match of the day, people are tired, so yeah, do forgive Alex and Dan for their misplace here, but yeah, he definitely could have installed the crowdfunding there. Alex recovers very nicely with a celebrity gift showing from top to bottom, NGO front, preemptive action, IPO, scarcity of resources, and the only ice in his hand, Excalibur. At this juncture, can we take a moment to appreciate the beauty of what just happened? Alex White, the guy with a giraffe as his Slack avatar, wearing a giraffe hat to the charity gift tournament, playing celebrity gift, the one card that features a teacup giraffe. This is some next level commitment to giraffes. Props to Alex for this. This is absolutely amazing. Right, so this is very vital information. Even though Alex now threatens a lot with a lot of money, he cannot threaten ice. He only has Excalibur, which is a non-factor. So it's very safe for Dan here to run because there won't be any repercussions, no face check problems at all. He runs HQ for his Gabe money, and of course Alex installs the Excalibur on HQ here. Right, so yeah, he now since he cannot run anymore for the rest of the turn, Dan continues setting up, playing a crowdfunding, and drawing a bunch of cards. So this is where the game starts slowing down as Alex is able to stabilize, recover from that nasty apocalypse. In terms of credit levels, he's now nicely at 13 thanks to an IPO. So now what can Dan do? Let's see. Alright, one important thing from that turn is that he knows that there is actually no ice in HQ. This is actually a big deal. Why was this the case? Because actually, there could be ice in HQ, but the chances are pretty low. So he saw the celebrity gift earlier and knew that there were no ice in HQ, except for the Excalibur, which is now on HQ. The next turn, he drew a card. Alex click 1 draw, click to install on R&D, click 3 IPO. So Alex drew 2 cards that turn, one from the mandatory draw and one from his click 1 draw. Unless both of the draws were ice, we know that at least one of those cards were an ice that is now on R&D, which means that if the other card is not an ice, Alex doesn't actually have any ice in hand, so it's actually safe for Dan to run here. Because of this, Dan is willing to take the risk by installing Sneak Door and going through into HQ. This doesn't seem like a very high value play because he knows that there are probably no agendas in hand, but as Gabriel Santiago, it works out. 4 credit install for Sneak Door gets repaid with Gabriel's ability. And he even gets to trash an NGO front off the back of it. So that's really nice, and he also confirms that there's no ice in Alex's hand, otherwise he would have installed it on archives there. So Alex committing an ice to R&D actually hurts him, because had he had the ice in HQ instead, he would have been able to install it off the back of Mt's ability. No strike in play. He sees the scarcity again. One more run, he accesses the IPO. So this turn Dan was installing Sneak Door and ran 3 times with Sneak Door. That triggers crowdfunding, and this time, thankfully for us, he remembers to install his crowdfundings. So that's 6 credits and 2 cards coming in the next 3 turns. This is really good for Dan, right? It was looking like Alex was going to be able to lock out all 3 centrals with some bulky ice. You know, he's on 13 credits, he can threaten a lot of ice, but Dan was able to get the triple run in and install his crowdfundings before Alex found any ice. He hasn't really been drawing much ice. Very unfortunate for Alex here. So, over to Alex. He has a Rashida stuck in hand, which is very awkward because he needs to ice archives first. The Sneak Door threat is real, but if he puts ice on archives, he can't actually get the Rashida to fire. He needs an ice to protect the Rashida. Dan still has no breakers, but is still able to get into HQ for free because Alex just hasn't been drawing ice. So, Sneak Door, click 1, seeing a Rashida and trashing it. The card in the bin is the Rashida. So that's really painful for Alex. He really could have used the extra draw and money. Click to Sneak Door again, just making sure that any agendas in hand do not go unchecked. He sees an IPO, continues on, setting up, third click install Earthrise, last click install Delister. So setting up his rig again, once he finds the next Ormakur, he's good to go for another Apocalypse. Alex finally fully stabilizes with an Ice on Archives, so that's the end of Sneak Dooring. Right, so in Dan's mind, Archives and R&D are not very safe, but he also knows that last turn Alex installed one piece of ice from hand, so the chances of him having more ice in hand is not that high, and he knows that the safest server to run is actually HQ, right? R&D and Archives have unknown ice, but HQ is a known quantity, an ice that can break freely for once, after that it fires. I shouldn't say break, I mean, let it fire once without any repercussions. So, Embezzle. This was a very good embezzle from Dan, identifying that, Alex is playing ice as he draws them. So it's quite unlikely that he actually has any ice in hand, and even if it does, it would be nice to force it out right here. The Excalibur fires, and Alex is actually forced to use the Nisei token here. It's a very interesting use of the Nisei token. He has no ice in hand. Maybe he's worried about the operations getting sniped, like he has a hedge fund, IPO, a bunch of money, and a scarcity as a counter current. So I think he did not want to lose the scarcity there. I think that was the main reason why he used the Nisei counter there. So it's an okay use of the Nisei counter. Unfortunately, this makes it a lot harder to score his next agenda. Right, over to Dan. He's very happy that he managed to force a Nisei counter with the Embezzle. He'll take that any day of the week. He takes 2 credits and passes the turn over, where Alex draws 2 cards and plays IPO. Alex is a very fast player here. Back to Dan. Right, on the start of his turn, he actually draws 4 cards because both crowdfundings ran out, and Earthrise takes down 1. So this is the sheer power of running Earthrise and crowdfunding in your deck as a criminal. Even though crowdfunding only draws 1 card each, if you're able to recur them, you're getting a lot of card draw over the course of the game, enough to draw you into your solutions. In this case, the Eater that we see in his hand, his alternate AI breaker. Because, clearly he can't draw his other turtle, so Eater will have to suffice. Click once, install Eater. Click 2 is a nasty diversion of funds, once again, locking Alex's credit pool. You'll figure by this time Alex actually has drawn some ice, but no matter what ice Alex installs here, Dan almost certainly will be able to get past with his Eater, so this is a very good play for Dan. He actually breaks the Excalibur here, because he wants to run again sometime later. Alex says, nope, I have no ice in hand, I'm going to pretend to shuffle my hand, but there are no ice here, so the diversion happens. Alex is 5 credits poorer, and Dan capitalizes with a follow-up Dirty Laundry, seeing a hedge fund. And last click is... Dirty Laundry was the last click, because diversion of funds was clicks 2 and 3. Back to Alex. Thankfully, he kept some of his money cards because he used the Nisei token on the Embezzle. He managed to retain his hedge fund, which he now plays. And he's also able to draw a card and install 1 more ice on HQ, which will definitely prevent any more HQ shenanigans with this nasty Gabriel Santiago deck. Dan has made a lot of money off Gabe so far, even though we now think of Gabe as being outclassed by newer criminal IDs like 419. Dan here is proving that Gabe can put in a lot of work. He's probably earned at least 8, if not more, credits off Gabriel Santiago this game, and they certainly matter, right? Because if he wants to land the next Apocalypse, he will need every single credit he can get, and the Gabriel Santiago credits are definitely paying off here. Now, click 1, he sneak doors, and he sees a DNA tracker, which he breaks with Eater. After some thought, Alex is going to empty and install IP block on Archives. Feels really bad to put 2 pieces of ice on Archives. That is a heavy commitment, but knowing that you're up against an Apocalypse deck, Alex has no choice here. And anyway, it's huge value because with an AI breaker installed, Dan is forced to take a tag here from IP block. He still wants the successful run, so he's gonna break IP block for 4 credits and take the tag and access no cards, but gains 2 credits off Gabriel Santiago. The reason why he wanted to make a successful run was because now he's able to threaten the Apocalypse by running R&D and then Archives one more time. But here, Dan is pondering a lot because obviously Archives is a lot harder to get into now. The IP block is really causing a lot of problems, and the DNA tracker is very bulky. Despite having a delister, it's still pretty difficult to get into Archives, so his Apocalypse plans have kind of been thwarted this turn. He's going to attempt to threaten the Apocalypse here by click 2 playing Spearfishing on R&D. Right? Spearfishing on R&D allows Dan to completely bypass whatever this ice is, and without MT's ability anymore, Alex cannot stop Dan from entering R&D. What Alex does, however, is to actually res the border control here and immediately trash it after Dan breaks it. So this allows, this basically prevents the Apocalypse this turn, which is very good for Alex. Unfortunately, this is only delaying the inevitable. Right, as we see, Alex is now down to 2 credits. His border controls are all in the bin. True to the card art, he's definitely being put down on the floor here. Sorry, Alex, we love you. And yeah, Dan is just going to keep running and clear the tag. He did not make 3 successful runs this turn, so no crowdfundings. But it doesn't really matter. With no money and no ice in hand, Alex is not able to secure R&D, even though Archives is very well secured and the Apocalypse probably won't happen anytime soon. Dan can easily recover by running R&D 3 times here, which is what he would do to get the crowdfunding trigger, but he doesn't need to because the top deck was an Obo Carter that puts him on 7 points to win the game. So, despite the game being relatively one-sided, I think that was a very good showcase of the dynamics in an Apocalypse versus Glacier matchup, and how some very small decisions can have very snowbally effects or large consequences that just completely tip the game in one side's favor. In this case, Dan got the better end of the exchange. Firstly, it must be noted that Alex had a suboptimal draw, or rather a below average draw. Early on, he drew all the small binary and the run ice, and while that's good for pushing through an early Rashida, or in his case Nisei Mark II, it was unfortunately very, very bad against Armor Core plus Apocalypse, right? There was no way Alex was able to tax Dan out with the Dean Lister, and as a result, he basically had no way to defend against the first Apocalypse, and that was very unfortunate. The Anansi just came a little too late, and that was a very big mistake to install and res the Anansi during the Apocalypse turn. I think that was the single biggest game changer there. Basically bankrupting Alex and leaving him with no ice, so Dan was able to capitalize very much off of that. That being said, we have to give a lot of credit to Dan, who made some very ingenious plays. The best play I think was actually running the Nisei remote. I think a lot of runners in that position would not contest the Marcus Batty remote. They would see, they have MT trigger, they have an ice on it with a Marcus Batty protecting it. I cannot, there's just no way I can get in even with a Dean Lister. Dan said, I don't care, I'm gonna try even if I die trying, and he actually did a very good job of it. I mean, sure, winning the Batty side game helped, but by doing that, what he gave himself was a chance to force Alex to pop the border control. And while eventually it didn't matter because obviously the Apocalypse happened, so the Apocalypse would have trashed the remote anyways, the important thing was he actually denied 5 credits from Alex, because by forcing the border control res, Alex was 4 credits poorer, plus 1 from the Batty side game. So by contesting the remote, basically he made Alex poor, and that's a very big deal. This meant that Alex had less time to draw up because he needed to spend the recovery turns taking credits. So you see, these kind of small plays actually add up. In a parallel universe where Dan did not run the remote and Alex scored the Nisei uncontested, it could have been a very different game because Alex would actually have some money post-Apocalypse. The last thing you'll notice here is, even though border control seems bonkers in MT Waikundu, the ability to just use MT's ability to install and end the run ice out of nowhere is pretty crazy, but it doesn't actually hard counter Apocalypse as much as you think it does. Even though border control on any central can theoretically end an Apocalypse attempt, the problem is the runner doesn't have to commit the Apocalypse card during the turn they wish to Apocalypse. If you pop the border control during an Apocalypse turn, the runner says, okay, fine, I guess I'll Apocalypse next turn then, and on your next turn, you don't have the border control to defend you. You're just delaying the Apocalypse. This is very important because unlike with remotes, if you put border control on a remote, it's very strong because firstly, there's more ice on the remote, so every border control ending the run means a lot more resources wasted on the runner's end. The second important key point to note is that you only need to keep the runner out for one turn, and that is on the turn on the turn you're trying to score your agenda, you're on the same Mark 2 or whatever. So this is why border control is really good as a remote ice. It's a lot less good as a central ice because with Apocalypse, the runner can just say, I can go in next turn again. And yeah, as you saw this game, every time Alex popped the border control on centrals, on the R&D for example, in the last turn, right? He stopped Dan from spearfishing R&D. He delayed the Apocalypse, which was nice, but then all Dan had to do next turn was to run R&D. There was no more ice left because Alex popped the border control and he won off the top deck. So yeah, the run base archetype is very strong, and with Apocalypse it's made even stronger by the fact that Glacier decks have to play around this board wipe, which just completely changes the game. So that's all I have for this video, but we'll have more content coming up as Alex and Dan will swap sides for the second game. Tune in then. Till then, thanks for watching and goodbye.